Attention shifted when text messages, depositions, and other materials that had previously been discussed separately began appearing together in the court record. That grouping, more than any single document, is what brought this stage of the case into focus. To understand why that matters, it helps to follow the order in which these materials entered the record and how they were handled along the way. Over the past year, depositions were conducted, testimony was recorded, and documents were gathered through discovery. Some of that material included text messages, emails, audio files, and portions of deposition testimony connected to multiple people involved in the case. At the time, much of that material was not publicly available. More recently, a judge ruled that a large group of documents attached to a motion for summary judgment would be unsealed, with only limited redactions for personal information. That decision placed existing materials back into view, not because they were newly created, but because they were now accessible through the docket. As a result, items such as Blake Lively's text messages, Ryan Reynolds' text messages, and portions of Jenny Slate's deposition began circulating together. Labels such as exposed and fraud have been applied to that material in discussion, but those labels reflect how the release was described, not what the documents themselves establish. This breakdown focuses on sequence, when depositions occurred, how evidence was attached, and how unsealing changed visibility, rather than reaction or outcome. The starting point for this stage of the case is not the public discussion that followed, but the procedural path through which materials were gathered and placed into the court record. Before any ruling on access occurred, the case moved through standard litigation steps, beginning with discovery and continuing through scheduled depositions. Discovery is the phase where parties exchange information relevant to the claims and defenses being litigated. During this process, different categories of material were collected. That included text messages, emails, audio files, and other documents connected to the issues raised in the case. Some of this material existed long before the litigation reached this stage, while other items were gathered in response to formal discovery requests. At this point, the focus was on collection and preservation, not public access. Alongside discovery, depositions were conducted. Depositions are structured questioning sessions in which witnesses answer questions under recorded conditions. The resulting deposition testimony becomes part of the case file and reflects what was said during questioning at that specific time. Once testimony is recorded, it does not change as the case continues. It remains fixed as part of the evidentiary record. It is important to distinguish between how testimony and written materials enter the case. Depositions involve live questioning and recorded responses. Written communications, such as text messages and emails, already exist before questioning takes place. They are gathered separately through discovery and reviewed as documents. Even when they relate to the same subject matter, these materials follow different procedural paths into the record. As the case progressed, portions of this material were attached to filings, including a motion for summary judgment. When documents are attached to such filings, they become part of the docket. Even if those attachments are not immediately visible to the public, they exist within the court record as filed materials. For a period of time, many of these attachments were sealed. Sealing restricted access, but did not alter the substance of the materials. The evidence remained the same, regardless of whether it could be viewed publicly. The procedural posture of the case did not change during this period. The shift came later, when a judge ruled on whether those sealed attachments would remain restricted or be made accessible. That ruling addressed access only. No new documents were created, no additional depositions were taken, and no new testimony was recorded. Understanding this sequence explains how attention arrived at this stage without a new procedural step being introduced. When the documents were later unsealed, The procedural status of the case did not change, but the way the materials could be accessed did. This distinction explains why attention increased even though no new step was taken within the litigation itself. The materials at issue were already part of the court record. They had been attached to filings, including the motion for summary judgment, and they existed on the docket while access was restricted. Sealing limited visibility, but it did not remove the documents or alter their content. When a judge ruled on whether those attachments would remain sealed, the ruling addressed access only. It did not reopen discovery, authorize additional depositions, or modify existing deposition testimony. The decision did not change what the materials contained, it changed who could see them. Once access restrictions were lifted, different categories of material became visible together. That included text messages, emails, audio files, and portions of deposition testimony that had entered the case through different steps. Seeing those materials at the same time can create the impression of a new development, even when the materials themselves are unchanged. This is because visibility affects how documents are encountered. Materials that were previously reviewed separately over time were now accessible in a single place. That proximity can draw attention, even though the sequence that placed them into the record remains the same. Importantly, unsealing does not transform documents into findings. The court did not issue conclusions about the meaning of the evidence. The ruling did not determine credibility or resolve claims. It addressed only whether sealed attachments would remain restricted. In discussions surrounding the unsealing, strong labels were sometimes applied to the materials. Words such as exposed or fraud appeared as descriptions of how the release was perceived. Those labels reflected reactions to visibility rather than procedural determinations made by the court. From a procedural perspective, the case remained anchored to the same steps that occurred before the ruling. The evidence did not expand. No additional testimony was recorded. The unsealing made existing material easier to review, but it did not move the case forward. Understanding what unsealing does and what it does not do helps separate increased attention from actual procedural change.
Once the documents were unsealed, the way they were encountered changed, even though the materials themselves had not. Items that entered the court record through different procedural steps were now visible at the same time, which affected how they were read and discussed. Depositions had taken place earlier in the case. During those sessions, witnesses were questioned and answers were preserved as deposition testimony. That testimony reflected what was said during questioning at that specific point in time. It did not include later filings or later document production. Separately, written communications, such as text messages and emails, existed outside the deposition process. They were created before questioning occurred and later gathered through discovery. These materials were reviewed as documents, not as testimony, and they followed a different path into the record. The point at which these materials became closely associated was when they appeared together as attachments to filings, including the motion for summary judgment. Once those attachments were unsealed, the materials were accessible through the docket in one place. That proximity made them easier to compare, even though they originated from different procedural steps. When Blake Lively's text messages, Ryan Reynolds' text messages, and portions of Jenny Slate's deposition are viewed side by side, it can appear as though they were introduced together. In reality, they entered the case at different times and through different processes. The unsealing made that distinction less visible. This change in presentation can shape perception. Materials that were previously encountered separately are now read together, which can suggest a connection that is based on access rather than on sequence. The timeline that brought them into the case is not always apparent when reviewing the docket. Some discussion applied strong labels to this grouping, including terms like exposed or fraud. Those words reflected how the visibility of the materials was described. They did not come from findings or rulings about what the documents establish. Understanding how and when materials entered the record helps clarify why this stage drew attention. The case did not gain new evidence at this point. Existing materials became easier to review together. When the documents were unsealed, the ruling itself focused on a narrow question: whether materials already filed in the court record would remain restricted or be accessible. The ruling did not introduce new filings, and it did not alter the procedural posture of the case. The materials at issue had already been attached to filings, including the motion for summary judgment. Those attachments existed on the docket while access was limited. Sealing affected visibility, not substance. The documents were present in the record regardless of whether they could be viewed. When a judge ruled on the status of those sealed attachments, the decision applied only to access. It did not reopen discovery. It did not authorize additional depositions. It did not revise existing deposition testimony. The ruling did not change what the materials contained. This distinction matters because unsealing can be misunderstood as a procedural shift. In reality, the ruling did not move the case forward. It did not resolve claims. It did not make findings about credibility or meaning. It addressed whether the public could see materials that were already part of the file. At the time the ruling was issued, the evidence remained exactly as it had been before. Text messages, emails, and audio files gathered through discovery did not change. Testimony recorded during depositions did not change. No new material was added to the case. Even so, increased visibility can change how material is perceived. When previously sealed documents become accessible, they are often reviewed more closely. That attention can create the impression that something new has occurred, even when the underlying steps are unchanged. Some discussions surrounding the unsealing applied strong labels to the materials. Words such as exposed or fraud were used to describe how the release was viewed. Those terms reflected reactions to visibility rather than determinations made by the court. From a procedural standpoint, the case remained anchored to the same steps that occurred before the ruling. The unsealing made existing material easier to review. It did not alter the timeline, expand the record, or change the status of the case. After the documents were unsealed, the most noticeable change was not procedural movement but increased visibility. The materials being discussed had already entered the court record through earlier steps. What changed was the ease with which they could now be reviewed together. By this stage, discovery had already concluded. During that phase, parties gathered different categories of material, including text messages, emails, and audio files. Those materials existed independently of the later discussion and were collected as part of routine case preparation. They did not emerge suddenly when access restrictions were lifted. Depositions had also already taken place. During those sessions, witnesses were questioned and answers were recorded as deposition testimony. That testimony reflected what was said at the time it was given. It was preserved as part of the case and did not change when the documents were later unsealed. The point where these materials became closely associated was when they appeared together as attachments to filings, such as the motion for summary judgment. Once those attachments were accessible, they could be viewed side by side through the docket. That grouping made it easier for readers to move between different types of material without navigating separate filings. When Blake Lively's text messages, Ryan Reynolds' text messages, and portions of Jenny Slate's deposition are visible together, it can feel as though they were introduced at the same time. In reality, they entered the case through separate procedural steps. The unsealing did not change their origin or their content. It changed how they were encountered. This shift in access can amplify attention even when the case itself remains unchanged. Increased visibility often leads to closer review, comparison, and discussion. That process can happen without any new filing, testimony, or ruling on the merits. Some discussions surrounding the unsealed materials used strong descriptors, including terms such as exposed or fraud.
Those words reflected reactions to the availability of the documents. They were not findings issued by the court and did not alter the status of the evidence. From a procedural standpoint, the case remained where it was before access changed. No new discovery occurred. No additional depositions were taken. The ruling addressed who could see the materials, not what the materials established. Understanding that distinction helps explain why attention increased without the case itself moving forward. After the ruling to unseal the filings, the procedural position of the case remained anchored to what was already present in the court record. The decision did not initiate a new phase of litigation. It did not alter deadlines, reopen issues, or introduce additional filings beyond those already submitted. At this point, the materials being discussed were the same materials that had been gathered earlier through discovery. That included text messages, emails, and audio files collected during the exchange of information between the parties. Those materials existed before the ruling and remained unchanged after access restrictions were lifted. The same is true for depositions. Witnesses had already been questioned, and their answers were preserved as deposition testimony. That testimony reflected what was said during questioning at the time it occurred. Once recorded, it became part of the case file and did not change based on later attention or discussion. The unsealing affected how these materials could be viewed, not what they contained. Attachments to the motion for summary judgment that had previously been sealed were now accessible through the docket. That access made it easier to review multiple documents together, even though they had entered the case through different steps. Because of this visibility, materials such as Blake Lively's text messages, Ryan Reynolds' text messages, and portions of Jenny Slate's deposition were often encountered side by side. That presentation can suggest a convergence, even though the procedural history places each item at a different point in the timeline. Importantly, the ruling did not resolve any claims. It did not determine credibility, weigh testimony, or interpret the meaning of the evidence. It addressed whether documents already filed would remain restricted or be available for review. Some discussion surrounding the unsealed materials continued to use strong descriptors, including terms such as exposed or fraud. Those words reflected how the availability of the documents was characterized in conversation. They were not conclusions reached by the court and did not alter the procedural posture of the case. As the case stands now, no new discovery has been ordered, no additional depositions have been scheduled, and no new testimony has been recorded. The sequence remains the same. What changed was access, not position. Understanding that distinction helps clarify why attention increased while the case itself stayed procedurally steady. At this stage, the most stable reference remains the court record itself. The materials now being discussed, including deposition testimony, text messages, emails, and audio files, entered the case through established steps and were later made accessible after the ruling to unseal certain filings. The sequence is consistent. Information was gathered through discovery, depositions were conducted, and testimony was recorded. Documents were attached to filings, such as the motion for summary judgment. For a period of time, access to those attachments was restricted. The ruling addressed whether that restriction would continue. That decision did not change the content of the evidence. It did not revise testimony, add new material, or resolve any claims. It affected visibility only. Some discussion has used strong descriptors, including terms such as exposed or fraud, to characterize the release of the documents. Those words describe how the unsealing was framed, not what the materials themselves establish within the case. By following the order in which materials entered the record, it becomes easier to separate procedural steps from reaction. The case remains anchored to the same filings and testimony that existed before access changed. What shifted was how easily the materials could be reviewed together. If this kind of step-by-step breakdown is useful, you can like the video or subscribe for future updates.